So today I will examine the 8 complex abortion cases and go over which ones are the most justified, least justified, and why. I'll use this by using the 8 key questions, so the fairness, the outcomes, the rights of the people, and responsibilities, while also going over things like the autonomy, the non-malevolence, and the justice of all of these. So first I'd like to go over where I draw my lines personally. I want to clarify my general position before I start any of this. So on a moral basis, I think abortion is most justified when obviously the mother is at risk, or when the fetus is gonna not survive, or when it's resulting in something like a rape. It just seems to be less justified when it's elective and not tied to something that's a hardship, or something that's medically necessary. And then from a legal standpoint, I think abortion should stay being an option, especially in like an early pregnancy and where it is necessary. But I mean, I think there should be some restrictions, like if you just got an abortion just because you wanted to. I just don't think that's right. So I'm gonna break these down into sections. So I'll go over the most justified cases, and then give you the reasonings to the least justified cases. So for the most justified case, I had case 2, the ectopic pregnancy. I think this is the clearest case of the most justified. So what happens in an ectopic pregnancy is it's where the embryo implants outside the uterus, so it mostly falls into like the fallopian tube and it grows. So basically what happens in this case is like it basically causes internal bleeding for the mother. So like the fetus won't survive with or without the abortion. And if it's not taken care of soon enough, the mom can die. Both the mom and the fetus can die. And then similar to like the leukemia treatment, obviously when you have leukemia, you do I mean, you might have to take chemotherapy, and with chemo, I mean, I think that can cause a lot of harm to a fetus, or ultimately kill it. So some ethical reasoning around that is obviously without intervention, that could cause a mom and the fetus to die. And obviously as a doctor, like you have to prevent the harm of that happening. And then in this case, I feel like saving the mother's life is the only option, because I mean, with or without it, the fetus is gonna die or the mother's gonna die. So I think there's both a moral reason why this is justified and also a legal reason why that's justified. So then case 3, the case where there was the brain death. So this case is where Marlise, who was the woman who was brain dead, was kept on life support just to like have the fetus like be there. So the ethical reasoning, the autonomy, obviously she was pronounced dead, so she can't consent whether or not she wants that fetus in her or not. And then the justice of it is just they kind of used her dead body solely just because they could, which also raises a lot of ethical concerns. And then the medical reality of it all is that her brain was dead, so there was really no bringing her back. So I think ultimately in that case, like ending the pregnancy or continuing the pregnancy is like kind of questionable, because I mean, it can't, like, the child can't live if the mom's not alive. So I think ending the life at that point is very justified. And then the last case that I think was the most justified was the case of rape. I think in this case the mother might go through a lot of like vulnerability issues, and some ethical reasoning behind that is like the woman's violated in this case, and the victim that went through this, I mean, they didn't choose the position that they're in. They were forced against their will to go through that. And there's like some psychological harm behind that. Like if the victim does choose to like keep that child, they're gonna be met with a lot of psychological like trauma. More moderately justified cases, I had case 5, Sherry Finkbein. This is the case where she had taken drugs to prevent morning sickness, but then later she found out that the drugs had caused major deformities in people and fetuses. So the ethical reasoning behind this, I mean, there's a high likelihood that the kid's gonna suffer, and in the time like that, like you have to think of the quality of life of the kid. If the fetus does grow up into a baby and later on to a functioning person, they're gonna have a hard time functioning and they're gonna suffer. So you have to keep that in mind. But also at the same time, I think a lot of people might look at this and be like, well, it's kind of discrimination towards people that do live that life, because like it's kind of just saying like, oh, like your life's basically meaningless because you can't do anything about it. Like, so I think in some cases, like, some people might think that that's wrong. So I think it's like, I think morally it's justifiable, but in some cases I think it could be wrong. Case 4 with the IVF. So this is like stem cell research. So in this case, like the embryo is still at a very early stage, so it can't really live yet. So I think in this case, it's kind of justifiable. Potentially it does have the potential to save someone's life. But I think a really big thing that is argued with this a lot of the time is where like human life begins. So a lot of people are against it because, things like religion and stuff take place, so they might believe that this is wrong because you technically are ending a human life. But I think that all just depends on where you think a human life like begins. So for case 6, the 16-year-old being financially strapped. So in this case, it's like a minor having a child with limited resources and support from whoever, their guardian, whoever's around. Um, so in this case, it's like a minor having a child with limited resources and support from whoever, their guardian, whoever's around. Um, so in this case, it's like a minor having a child with limited resources and support from whoever, their guardian, whoever's around. I think something like ethically, we could think about something like long-term impact on both the mother and the child. If the kid doesn't have a kid, I personally believe that a kid cannot raise a kid. I think in this case it's moderately justifiable because, I mean, if the mom's gonna suffer, the child's probably gonna suffer. I think morally this could be understandable and justified, but it's not as life-threatening compared to something like a rape or a birth defect or something like that. So now moving on to like our least justified cases, the 25-year-old who has like a stable career and everything. I do believe that women have the right to choose, but I mean, if you're financially stable, I feel like that's not really ethical because, I mean, it's legally permissible, but I think because it's not really a hardship or a medical case, it's just simply I don't want to have it. I think that's not really justified. But I think it all comes down to whatever the woman wants to do. But I do think there are a lot of alternatives that someone could take other than terminating that pregnancy. And then another not as much justified case would probably be like a late term abortion. I don't think that's as justified because obviously it's happening later within the pregnancy, so I mean that baby has had more time to develop. And I think at that time, like, it's just wrong because that baby has had time to develop, so it has the potential to survive outside the womb. So I don't think it's as justified. I do think that there's a lot of restrictions that go with that, both morally and legally. So for my final conclusion, I would say the most justified cases, these all involve like had to be medically necessary or they would have caused severe harm. Those would be 1, 2, and 3. The most moderately justified cases would be 4, 5, and 6. And then my least justified were obviously case 7 and case 8. So I think overall, the moral and legal lines are not identical, but something that could be legal can be morally still questionable. But I don't think laws should allow flexibility for extreme and complex situations, especially those that have health or like have the ability to survive.